probably at some point in your life done a tutorial or a lesson somewhere else out there on the internet. And inevitably, at some point, you'll probably get stuck on a problem. Now, I spend a lot of time thinking about how I can make the course such that you get stuck less often. But with programming, it's almost a core part of the learning process that you do get stuck and you get yourself unstuck. So I tend to find that when I get stuck on something, I try to see it as a challenge, because usually when I solve it and when I figure it out, there is a huge sense of satisfaction and there's usually some associated growth. Now, having taught over 100,000 students online and offline, I've seen people struggle in lots of different ways. And I just wanted to summarize the steps that you can go through when you get stuck on any sort of programming problem and the framework that you can use to get yourself unstuck in the quickest way possible. Now, the first step is to evaluate what is the expectation versus what is the reality. What did you expect your code to do? Or what did you expect to happen? And what actually happened? So every time you run your code, think to yourself, what do I expect to happen? And then see what really happened and try to figure out what is causing the difference. Now, while you're writing code, it's inevitable that you will end up creating errors. And this can happen when you've made a mistake or spelled something wrong, or even when you're just trying to install a piece of software. And those errors are usually accompanied by bits of text or the error message. And you can see this in your browser or in your code editor. And most of the time, it might seem like these error messages are written by aliens because they don't seem to make any sense. But you can quite easily figure out the human meaning in English for it by just putting it into Google. And you'll usually get lots of different answers as to what the cause might be and how you can fix the problem. And one of the websites, if you don't already know about it, it's going to shortly become your very best friend, and that is stackoverflow.com. So I recommend searching for any errors that you come across into Google and then heading towards the Stack Overflow websites that come up as a result. And this is exactly what real life developers do every single day. And in fact, I've worked in teams where we will all just go to the pub and have a drink and end the day if Stack Overflow is no longer working. So it's all a part of the developer workflow. Now, if that still didn't help, or you're confused by the results that you're getting back, then it's a good idea to re-watch some important that you check to make sure that you haven't made a typo here from the completed code into your own module, just to see if that line or that paragraph helped to fix the issue. And if that still doesn't solve it, then the next step is head towards the Q&A. So underneath every lesson, there is a Q&A section. And it's a good idea to check in the lesson when your app has broken to see whether if anybody else had similar issues to you. And if you can't find anybody with the same issues, then ask in the Q&A. But make sure that you ask your question in the lesson where you're having the issues. That way, it makes it much easier for other students to be able to learn from your mistakes, and also for me to be able to quickly identify what the problem might be. And if you have a question about anything in the tutorial, it's a good idea just to include the timestamp at which it occurs in the video, so I can quickly watch it and figure out what you're referring to, so that I can better answer your questions. Now, when you're asking questions in the Q&A, the way to get the most helpful responses and solutions is by following a 4-step approach. So firstly, tell us, so myself and other students, what did you expect to happen? Then what actually happened? And then include a screenshot of all of your code that corresponds to this situation, and then include a screenshot of the debug console that includes any errors, if there were any errors or if your app has crashed. Now, to take a screenshot of part of the screen in Windows, all you have to do is hold down the Windows key, Shift and S, and then you'll get these little crosshairs show up, and you'll be able to take a section of your screen as a screenshot. And once you let go of the mouse, it will save this to your clipboard, ready to be pasted into Paint or any other application. If that doesn't work for you, be sure to just Google how to take a screenshot of part of the screen, and you'll see lots of videos that can help you with this as well. If you're using a Mac computer, on the other hand, this shortcut is going to save you a lot of time, and it might be worth noting this down in your notebook. When you use Command, Shift, and 4, you get this little crosshair that shows up, And you can start clicking and dragging the area that you want to take a screenshot with, and it will save it automatically to your desktop, which then you can upload into the Q&A area for the lecture. So that's just a brief step-by-step process on what to do and how to get help when you get stuck. And it's important to remember that everybody gets stuck sometimes. I've spent days trying to find a bug in my code, and it turns out to be just a comma that was misplaced or a semicolon that was accidentally deleted. And one of the greatest joys for me anyways is figuring out these problems and fixing them. So don't worry if you do get stuck. Everybody will try to help you. And just remember that getting stuck and solving it is all a part of the learning journey. All right, so now let's tackle what exactly is HTML and how do we use it to structure our websites. So no matter what you use as your browser, it could be Chrome, it could be Safari or Philo, and in the body, there should be a heading that says Hello World. So if we pass that code into our browser, it will open it and display it like so, with the title of the website usually on the tab bar, and that H1 or that big heading showing up in the body of our website. So before we dive deep into this, it's really important to remember that HTML is the foundation of all websites. So, for example, you won't see websites that are created using just a CSS file or just a JavaScript file, but you can create websites using just an HTML file. Now, it might not look great. It'll probably look like it came from the 90s, but it does enable your website to display text or various elements such as images or forms or tables, depending on how you code up the HTML file. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And the really important part here is the word markup, because there's many markup languages. For example, you might have heard of things such as XML, Extensible Markup Language, or GML, Generalized Markup Language. And all of these languages share a common history. They're based off the markup that used to be put into manuscripts, where editors would mark up the manuscript and either specify changes to the author or specify structure and layout to the publishers. So for example, you might have the squiggly line that shows the publishers that this part should be printed in bold or this part should be printed in italics. And HTML works in much the same way. You can specify the layout and structure of your website by using HTML tags. So if you head over to your browser and go to a website called codepen.io, then we can have a look and have a play around with real live HTML. So you don't have to sign up, just head over to codepen.io and then hit create new pen. And then we're going to change the view to a format like this. So this is the live version of our website. And these are the places where we're going to put our code. So as you can see, CodePen lets you put in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which will together get interpreted and get shown on the left as your website. Now, as we're only working with HTML at the moment, I'm going to minimize the CSS and JavaScript sections, and I'm just going to work from the HTML section. Now, we're going to need some text to work with or to have something which we can give structure to. If you head over to gutenberg.org/ebook/1661, you get taken to The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. So one of my favorite books of all time. If you have a look down here, you can see that you can view the book as plain text, or you can read this book online as HTML. So this is what the plain text looks like. It has all of the text in the book, but absolutely no structure. But when we have a look at the HTML file, you can see that it has laid out the book with a structure that is more human readable. And this is what we're going to replicate using HTML. So if you go ahead and just copy this part, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and you copy it and place it into your pen. So in the HTML section here. Now, you can see that all of this text gets put onto the screen with absolutely no structure. And in order for this to start looking like this, we're going to start adding a little bit of HTML. So the first thing we can see is that this is the largest heading on the page. So we can make our website look like that also by adding an H1 tag into our HTML. So the tags start with angular brackets and end with angular brackets, and in the middle is the type of element or the type of tag you want to use. Now, it's really important that when you open tags that you should also close them, because as you can see here, I've got an open tag, but I have yet to close it, and it thinks that the entire contents of my page should be made into the largest heading possible. And that's not what I want. I only want it for this section, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So in order to close the tag, it's the same angle brackets, but then I have to use a / and then write H1. So now only this part is an H1 or a large heading. Now, if we have a look at the other parts, I would say that this word by is a little bit smaller than the author name. So let's structure this as a heading also, but let's make it a subtitle. So let's make it a slightly smaller heading. And to do that, we can simply wrap this text around an H2 tag. And now we have Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as a heading, but in a smaller size and shown with less importance than the big title. So now, finally, we have this word by, and I reckon that's one size smaller than this heading. So let's go ahead and wrap this inside an H3. So I hope you're starting to get the gist. The heading tags get smaller as the number goes up. So, for example, if I change this to an H4, it gets even smaller, H5, smaller still, and all the way until H6, which is the smallest font size for the heading element. Now, if you keep going to H7, you'll notice that it doesn't do anything anymore. It doesn't change the heading size. And that's because the heading elements only go from H1 to H6. Now, how do I know that, I hear you ask? So this is a good point in the course to introduce documentation. And the reason why I'm talking about it so early on is because of how important it is to your journey as a web developer. So one of the key skills in becoming a great web developer, or in fact any sort of programmer, is getting good at finding out how you can help yourself. And a lot of that involves getting good at Googling. How do you find the specific piece of information that's going to help you achieve what it is that you want, or help you understand what it is that you want to know? So in this case, we're talking about headings, and we are using HTML. And I'm going to add in the name of the documentation that I prefer to use, which is MDN, and it stands for the Mozilla Developer Network. So the same people who made Firefox, for example. So if I go ahead and hit enter, you see a whole bunch of results come up. And the most relevant for us is the H1 to H6, and it talks about headings. So if we click on that, you can learn more about the heading elements used in HTML. And they even have example code snippets that show you what it would look like rendered in a browser. Now, there's a couple of sources for documentation. One is, of course, MDN. Another one is called W3 Schools. So let's see if we try W3 Schools with HTML, and we're talking about headings, right? Let's see what we get here. So HTML headings is the first result that comes up. And similarly, you've got the code examples, you've got the results, and you've got a little bit of notes that tell you how you should be using your headings. So both of these places have a lot of really useful usage notes. And it's worth reading through when you're first coming across a particular element. That way, you'll have a good foundation of knowledge when you start to build and create your own websites. So I want to show you one last resource that I quite like using, which is called devdocs.io. And this is basically a website that puts together a lot of the similar to what we saw on MDN, but it's just structured in a very simple way, and it's very easy space between these lines. Now, in a word processor such as Word or Google Docs, you'll be able to simply just hit enter a few times or hit return a few times and get that spacing show up. Now, unfortunately, in HTML, it doesn't quite work like that. It's a little bit more complicated. In order to create that spacing, we actually have to use an HTML element called a line break, and it's written like so. And the interesting thing of HTML tags. All right, so let's talk about the anatomy of an HTML tag and break it down to its component parts so that we can actually understand how they're structured and how we can use them. So we've written HTML elements like so. So here we have the words hello world, and they're enclosed by an opening tag and a closing tag. And in between those tags is the content that we want to apply that structure to. So if you think back to the days of marking down a manuscript, it's exactly the same as putting down a squiggly line underneath certain words or phrases and asking the publisher to make it bolded to affect the structure of certain parts of the text. Now, in this case, the publisher just happens to be our browser. So these tags make requests to the browser, asking it to structure and display our plain text in the way that the web designer wanted it to be shown. Now, the other type of tag that we just saw are tags that don't have a closing tag. They're expressed simply like so. And these are called self-closing tags. And we've seen that with the break tag, and there's a few more others that work like this also. Now, how do we find out if something requires a closing tag or is self-closing? Well, this is where we head to the documentation again. So if we have a look at the documentation for the heading elements, you can see that there's this part in the table that says tag omission, and it says that both the starting and ending tags are mandatory so that you can specify which portion of your text you want to apply this structure to. Now, if we have a look at the BR or the line break element, you can see that under tag omission, it says that it must have a start tag and must not have an end tag. So this is how we find out how we write our tags. Now, while we're here, I want to introduce you to another element called the horizontal rule, or the HR tag. And this will allow us to create these horizontal lines above and below our portion of text. So as you can see in the documentation, under tag omission, it also says that it must not have an S. This is also a self-closing tag. So let's head back over to our pen so that we can add these two horizontal rules above and below our text. So the first one is going to go here. And the last one is going to go here. So you can see that our web page now has two horizontal lines above and below our main portion of text. Now, if we have a closer look at this website, you can see that their horizontal rule is a little bit thicker than ours. So how can we make ours look more like theirs? Now, this is the part where I show you a neat trick. in order to look at the HTML and CSS code that's being rendered in the background by the browser. So you can see here, they've got an HR element, horizontal rule, but they've got also all of this going on afterwards. So what exactly is that? Now we know that the first part of the tag is the HTML element, and it's BR or HR, whatever it is that you want to use. Now, the second part inside the angle bracket or inside our tag is new. And this is called an HTML attribute. And it basically gives more information to the browser to specify modifications to that HTML element. So in this case, we're saying that we want a horizontal rule, but we want it in size 3. Now, what does size 3 mean? And how do we know that we have these HTML attributes available to us? You've guessed it, we're going back to the documentation called attributes. And that's what we spoke about just now. The attribute comes after the main HTML element and is separated from the element by a single space. In this case, the horizontal rule element has actually quite a few attributes, including a line. So you can specify whether if you want your horizontal line to align to the left or align to the right or be centered. You can specify the color of the horizontal rule. You can set whether if you want the horizontal rule to have shading or not. And you can also set the height in pixels of that horizontal rule, which is what we saw earlier on over here. So in this case, the reason why their horizontal rule looks different to ours is because ours is by default only 1 pixel high or 1 pixel in size, whereas theirs, if you inspect in the HTML, is 3 pixels in height. And they've also specified no shade, i.e. no shading to the horizontal rule. So if we want to make our website a seamless copy of what we see here, then we also have to specify those attributes. So if you remember, the horizontal rule is a self-closing tag. And so inside the tag, we're going to make a space and then we're going to specify the name of the attribute, which we know from the documentation to be called the size attribute. And we're going to set it to equal 3 pixels. And then we're going to specify that it is no shade, i.e. no shading. And we know all of this from the documentation. So now, once our code updates, you can see that this brand new horizontal rule looks completely different from what it was before. And we can copy this over to the top as well, so that our horizontal rules look exactly the same as what we've got over here. So now we've seen HTML elements that require an opening tag as well as a closing tag. We've also seen HTML elements that have a self-closing tag. And finally, we've seen that HTML elements can also have an attribute where you can specify modifications to the default element. Now, all we need is just to add one final tag called center to our HTML file, and we would have now faithfully copied what this website looks like. So you can have a look through the HTML by, remember, right-clicking and inspecting in Chrome, and you can look through to see how they've structured the rest of the document as well. Now, this is a good point to mention our first challenge. So we've got this code pen now where we've been messing around with the HTML. Now you can either save if you will, and I want you to document here all the new things that you've learned as we progress through the course. So for example, in this and the last lesson, we learn about the H1 tag. So in our code playbook, the first thing that's going to go in is your H1 tag. And you can say that this is a level 1 heading created using the H1 tag. We can go ahead and close it off. And you can look through the documentation to perhaps copy some of these code snippets over. but make sure that whenever you're copying, pasting code, that you understand what the code does. There's nothing worse than copy and pasting code that breaks your website because you didn't understand what you've put in there. So we can go ahead and then modify each of these so that when we're creating our own websites and we want to come back to our playbook and have it as a point of reference, then we'll be able to see easily at a glance all of the elements that we've used and that we've learned about before. So my challenge to you is to create your very own code playbook and to start keeping notes on all the things that you're learning in this course. Now, sometimes with certain elements, for example, the line break, you won't be able to put any text inside the line break in the same way that we've done so for the H1 tag. This is a point where you can use a comment instead in your HTML file. Comments are portions of text which are marked out to be ignored by the browser. And they're usually places where you write notes to yourself or notes to fellow programmers who might be looking at your code. So in HTML, we create a comment by using the angle bracket, a exclamation mark, 2 dashes, and then to close off the comment, we use another 2 dashes and a closing angle bracket. And everything in between here is a comment. You can see that usually it gets highlighted in a different color and none of it gets interpreted into the web page. So this is where you can put sections for your notes. For example, self-closing tags. You can make it into several paragraphs just by putting the closing tag at the bottom. And you can write notes on the elements as we come across them and keep this for your own reference. By the time when you're ready to create your own websites, it will be a goldmine of a resource to jog your memory on all of the lessons that you've learned. So in the next lesson, we're going to be building our very first website. And it's going to be really, really awesome because we're going to be using a real text editor and we're going to be putting that website live onto the internet. So there's all of that and more yet to come. So I will see you on the next lesson. All right, so in this lesson, we're going to be building our very first website. Now, because we've only talked about HTML so far, so how to structure websites using HTML elements, and we haven't yet gotten to the part where we've learned about styling using CSS, then we're kind of limited in terms of the kind of websites that we can make. But fear not. Our websites are going to be right up there with the internet titans, but just way back in 1997. So do you remember what Yahoo looked like when it first launched? Or do you remember what Google looked like when it first came out? No? Don't remember? Well, there's a great website that can show you exactly that. And it's called the Internet Archive Wayback Machine. And you can find it at web.archive.org. Now, in here, if you just enter the URL of a website that you're interested in, say yahoo.com, then it shows you what this website looks like all the way from 1996 to current day, which is 2017. Now, let's have a look at what Yahoo looked like originally on the first day it was crawled, so 17th of October, 1996. So let's go ahead and click on that snapshot. And this is exactly what it looks like. So if we close off this frame, you can see it's almost like as if you've time traveled back to 1996 when Yahoo first launched and you were visiting this website for the first time. Now, as you can see, most of this is just pure HTML. It's a lot of structure and a lot of formatting, but it looks really ugly. But it's okay because it's a great place to get started with. So this is an interesting anecdote that you might not know. If you have a look at some of the world's top computer science professors and you look at their personal pages that they've built, they all look a little bit like this, not so dissimilar from the websites in 1996. So this is Thomas Corman, who's a serious algorithm guy. And this is a website of John Kleinberg, another huge name computer science professor. And of course, the king himself, Donald Knuth, has a website that looks like this. So if it's good enough for these computer science titans, then it's probably good enough also for our very first website. So by the end of this module, you have it set up with all the packages that we've specified in those installation videos. But once you've got it installed and opened, you should be looking at a screen like this. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to File and we're going to open a new project folder to work out of. You'll see your project and we're going to call our project. Click on see what's happening on screen, but feel free to start incorporating the shortcuts into your workflow. And as time goes on, you'll find that they make life so much quicker and so much easier. So now we're going to create our very first file. And you can see the way that the files are structured is that we're creating it inside this folder called HTML personal site. And inside that folder is where our web page is going to be located. Let's go ahead and create this homepage. And by convention, we're going to name it index.html. And that is usually the name that developers will give their homepage. So go ahead and hit enter in order to create that file. And if you open up this folder, you can see that's exactly where it's located. And it should open up on the right hand or the main pane over here as well. Now, in order to create any HTML website, there's a little bit of boilerplate code that's associated. Now and it will insert all of that boilerplate code, or because we installed the Emmet plugin, we can simply write HTML and then hit enter, and it will insert all of that boilerplate code for us. Now, if that didn't work for you, you could also hit the tab key after writing HTML or typing in exclamation mark and then hitting the tab or the enter key. Try some of these combinations that you see on screen if it's not working for you. So now we mentioned that this is a standard HTML boilerplate code. Now in programming, we talk about boilerplates quite frequently, and it's similar to having a code template, something that you'll reuse for different projects. And it comes from the days when the printing press would make these heavy iron plates that would function as their printing template. And because they looked very similar to the small metal plate that identified the builder of a steam boiler, they called it the boilerplate. So that's just where this word comes from. But when we're talking about it in programming, we usually mean a code template that you can reuse. Now, even though we didn't have to do very much work in order to get all of this into our file, it would still be a shame to lose it, right? So in Atom, whenever you see a blue dot on the tab bar of your file, that means that there's unsaved progress. And in order to make it disappear and to keep your progress, you can simply go to File and then click on Save, or use whatever shortcut that shows up for you over here. It should be Command S on Mac, and it should be Control S on Windows. For those of you who are interested, I've included a link to some of the most commonly used Atom keyboard shortcuts, and includes the commands for both Mac, Windows, and Linux for users of all three platforms. So go and have a look over there and start learning and using some of these shortcuts. And once you've saved your file in Atom, you'll see that little blue dot disappear, and now you can be rest assured that all your progress has now been safely saved. Now, there's quite a lot of stuff on the screen, so let's talk about this boilerplate line by line to understand what it all does. So the first line here is where we declare the document type. And this tells the browser when it opens up this file, what is the version of HTML that we're using. Now in this course, we're working with the latest version of HTML, which is HTML5. Now in previous versions of HTML, this doc type was incredibly convoluted. And in fact, I can show you what some of them look like. So we can write HTML for T, for example. And then because we've installed Emmet, if I hit tab, you can see this is what the boilerplate code for a particular HTML4 version would look like. And you can see that doc type is a lot longer, and very often programmers won't be able to remember that, so they actually have to look it up somewhere. But since HTML5, the doc type declaration became a lot simpler, and now it's just exclamation mark doc type HTML, and this tells the browser to render this file as an HTML5 document. And there's a few differences between how things will appear or how things will be structured, depending on whether if the doc type was HTML5 or a previous version. So that's the doc type. Now, we inserted all of this code using autocomplete from Emmet. And if you want to look at all the other things that you can do with Emmet, then you can go ahead and have a look at docs.emmet.io/cheat sheet. And here you can see what all of those abbreviations look like and what is the result of it. As you're developing into a professional web developer, it's a great resource to have in order to save yourself a lot of time when you get used to using these common shortcuts. Now, the next line in our code is an HTML tag. And this tells the browser that everything in between the opening and closing tags is going to be HTML code. And what does that code consist of? Well, it consists of a head and a body. Now, the head is the part of the HTML file that holds information about the web page, and it tells the browser how it should handle the page. So, for example, we might have a title tag in here that tells the browser what is the title of this particular document or this particular page. So let's go ahead and give our website a title. Let's call it whatever your name is. So mine is Angela. Angela's personal. And now if we go ahead and hit save, we can have a look at it inside our browser. Now there's a couple of ways how you can open up the website that you're coding up inside your browser. Now one of these ways is simply going into your Finder or your Explorer and finding that index.html file and then double clicking on it, and it should bring it up inside Chrome. Now the other way of opening up your website is if you right-click on your file inside Atom and you go to copy full path, then it copies the entire directory path to the location of your website. So if you just go ahead and paste it into the bar here, and here with this file path, we're telling the browser how to find this file index.html on our computer. So first we're telling it to go into a folder called users, then we're telling it to go into a folder called Angela U, then we're saying go to desktop, and then inside desktop, we're going to web development. And finally, we're going to HTML-personal site. And that is where we're going to find that index.html site. So let's go ahead and hit enter on that file path in order to do exactly the same as double clicking on this file, which is opening up our website inside Chrome. Now, if Chrome is not your default browser, then when you see the icon, it's not going to have the Chrome symbol here. So you can change that by going into your settings, then scrolling down to default browser in order to change it. Now, at the moment, our website doesn't contain any content yet, but it does have a title, which you can see here. And it says Angela's personal site, which is what we created over here. Now, inside the head section, there's also this meta element. Now, there's quite a few different meta elements, but this particular one is called, and the one that we're setting it to is UTF-8. Now, what does this line do? The meta elements give extra metadata or associated data to your HTML document. And in this case, we're telling the browser when it opens up this file that all the text inside our web page is encoded using the UTF-8 encoding system. So this is basically a list of all the available characters that we can use inside our website for it to be rendered correctly. Now, sometimes when you open up a web page, especially in an outdated browser like Internet Explorer or an email that you got from a Bulgarian friend, you might see some of the characters being jumbled up like this. And this is called mojibake. And it's a Japanese word that stands for characters that are transformed. And it occurs because your browser is trying to render the characters using the wrong character set. So, for example, if we have a look at this Wikipedia page for mojibake in Japanese, you can see that currently my browser is set to render all the web pages as Unicode, which is very similar to UTF-8. And you can see that everything looks pretty legit. It all looks more or less like Japanese. But if I decide to change the encoding of my browser and for it to interpret all the websites as something else, say Arabic, then you can see that all of this web page is now messed up. This is not a valid word, and none of this has any meaning because it's encoded the website incorrectly. So there's quite a few different types of encoding, and they're specialized for different languages because different languages use different symbols. So for example, if you have a look at the Windows Greek symbol chart, then you can see that the symbol at position 224 looks like this. But if you have a look at the chart for Windows Arabic, then 224 actually encodes a completely different character. And that's why we get these messed up websites or strange looking emails when it's interpreted using the wrong encoding. Now, UTF-8 is the standard encoding that you should be using when working with HTML5. And the reason for that is because it includes all of those international symbols. And in fact, every single symbol that is included in the Unicode character set. So if you go to unicode-table.com, then you can see a table of all of the Unicode characters. And if you scroll down, it's got this nice little animation that shows you as we change locations, going from Latin, so most of the English-speaking countries, to Greek and Coptic, then going to Armenian, Hebrew, Arabic, and all of the different languages. The other thing about Unicode is that it also includes emojis. So, for example, if you have a look at the emoji chart, let's look for heart symbols, for example, then we've got all of these different emoji characters that we can also use on our website that's encoded with UTF-8. So let's go ahead and give that a try. Let's find a nice looking heart symbol. We can right click to copy it or hit Command-C or Control-C. And we can paste it to the front of our website title using Control-V or Command-V. And now if I hit Save and go back to my website and hit Command-R or Control-R to refresh, or click this refresh button here, then you can see our title is updated with that emoji. So everything that is Unicode can be encoded correctly using UTF-8, and it's something that you should just have as your boilerplate code for any new website you create. This gives your website the maximum chance of being rendered correctly on browsers that are from international visitors. Now, if you're interested in doing a bit of background reading and learning more about Unicode and character sets, then this is a really good piece that I highly recommend by Joel Spolsky. It's a roughly 10-minute read, and it talks a lot about these character sets and how they encode different symbols and why you should be using something like Unicode or UTF-8 in your website in order to ensure maximum compatibility. So it's a good read, and I'll include a link to it in the resources for this lesson. Now, aside from the character set attribute for the meta element, there's also other attributes that you might see on different websites. So some of the common ones include description, or things like keywords about your website, who the author is, as well as viewport. And these meta tags tell the browser how it should render or display the web page. And also they give information to search engines about the content of the website. So for example, if we go to the website, the main page, so developer.mozilla.org, and we right click and we view page source, then we get to see the entire HTML file that's used to render this particular page. So this is what our browser sees and does all the hard work of making it look nice and pretty like this for us. So here, if you go ahead and hit Command-F or Control-F on Windows, you can search for the description attribute. Now, it's not this first one, but it is this third one, and it's this exact thing. And the description says, the Mozilla Developer Network, MDN, provides information about open web technologies, including HTML, CSS, and APIs. Now, if we go into Google and we search for MDN, you can see that the snippet of text that it shows about the main MDN website is exactly the same as what we saw just here in the description meta tag. And this is what search engines do. They crawl the HTML of your website and look for certain meta tags in order to know what your website is about and also how to display it in their search index. And there's a whole bunch of different attributes for the meta element, and you can have a read about it either on W3 Schools or what I recommend usually is the MDN web docs. So if you have a look at meta over here, then you can learn all about the different attributes, how to use them, and what they're good for. So in the next lesson, we're going to be tapping into our body section and we're going to be creating the content for this personal site of ours. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. Now, once you're ready, go ahead and open up the Atom editor. So now that we understand how the HTML boilerplate works and what each line does in it, it's time to move into the body section and start giving our website some content. Because at the moment, our website is looking a little bit plain. So if we have a look at John Kleinberg's website, the first thing that we want right at the top here is a level 1 heading that says our name. So let's head back into Atom, and as a challenge to you, add a level 1 heading inside the body section. So this one's easy, and it's made even easier using the autocomplete features inside Atom. All I have to write in order to create an H1 tag, which is what's needed to create a level 1 heading, is I just have to write H1 asking me, are you looking for heading level 1? And now if I hit enter or if I hit tab, I get the H1 tag inserted automatically, opened and closed for me, and my code pasted into here. Now, if I hit enter, you can see my H1, my level 1 heading gets shown up here, just like John Kleinberg's, and we're ready to move on to the next thing. Now, we want to have a line that shows our title, so who it is that we are. So let's head back to Atom. And firstly, I'm going to get rid of this little heart because it doesn't look very professional. And I'm going to add another HTML element under the H1. And this is a good point to talk about how to keep your HTML file neat and tidy. Now, most programmers are very serious about how to indent and structure their HTML files. And the reason for it is because having these indents makes it easy for us to see at a glance which tags are inside other ones. So for example, if we look at the top level here, we've got the HTML tag. And because both the head and the body tags are indented inside these HTML tags, it shows us at a glance that the head is inside the HTML element, and as is the body. But the body and the head, they're at the same hierarchical level. They're not inside of each other at all. And this is a good structure for us to be able to see at a glance what's happening in our code. And also when other programmers look at our code, because we're used to working with the same structure, it's easy to be able to understand what's going on at a glance. So you can see that there's one part of our code that breaks this rule, and that's this line here. Our H1 is contained inside our body element, and so it should be indented like so. And you can clearly see that this is now a child or contained inside the body tag. Now, if you didn't want to do that manually every single time, well, we actually installed a package right at the beginning that helps us with this organization. It's our little housekeeper, if you will. So if you go to Packages and go to Atom Beautify and click on Beautify, it will automatically beautify your entire code file to make all of the indents for you and to make everything look neat and tidy. So every so often, once your code starts getting messy, either learn the shortcut or go through it in the menu and reorganize your code file. It'll make it much easier on the eyes and much easier to read. So now I want to add my title under my H1 tag. And for this, I'm going to use the P tag, which is a paragraph tag. And the P tag formats text into a paragraph. So they get a new line and the text inside gets grouped together into the same paragraph. So let's add my title here. And now let's see what our changes look like. So remember again, Command S or Control S to save, and head back over to our site and Command R or Control R to refresh, or click this button to refresh. And there we go. There's our brand new paragraph showing up. Now, if we look at John Kleinberg's, you can see that his title is italicized and ours is not. So how can we make ours italicized as well? Well, this is where our lessons, our documentation is going to come in handy. Let's go ahead and go to Google and see if you can find out how to italicize your text using HTML. And it marks text that has a stress emphasis. Now, it looks like this in practice, and the result is that it makes it look italicized. Now, you might have noticed back here, we also had the I element or the I tag, and it does the same thing visually. It also makes the text that's in between the I tags italicized. But there's a little bit of a difference here, and the difference is quite subtle. The emphasis tag tells the browser the words that are enclosed between it should be stressed or should be, and it isn't just about the style. Remember, when we're writing HTML code, we're more concerned about structuring our text rather than caring about how it looks or how it appears. Now, a similar pair is the B tag or the bold tag. And this is equivalent to the I tag. It makes any text that's in between bolded, like so. But instead, what you should be using is the strong tag. And that's because the strong tag, again, confers meaning. It says that this text has strong importance, and therefore it's displayed in bold, rather than merely saying that this should be styled so that it's darker than the rest of the text. And if you're interested, you can have a read between bold and strong, as well as emphasis is strong, as well as emphasis in italic. It makes for some interesting reading and gives you a bit more background information on the difference between these two tags. But whenever you're looking to make something bold in your website, you should probably be using the strong tag. And whenever you want to make something italicized, you should be using the emphasis tag. So let's go ahead and make our paragraph, this title, italicized or emphasized like so. So if you remember, all we have to do is just to enclose it inside the EM tag. Now you can do that for the entire length of the text, or you can simply apply it to just a section of the text. So for example, if I wanted to make the part where it says the at brewery bolded, then I can simply add a strong tag and have the at brewery, not including the full stop, inside this strong tag. Now, if I hit save and go ahead and refresh, then you can see that the entire paragraph is emphasized and the app brewery is bolded. So we've done a little bit of formatting for our website. Now let's move on to the next part. We're going to add a little bio here. And that again is going to be inside a paragraph element. And it just tells anybody who's visiting our personal site who we are and what we're all about. So once you're ready, go ahead and figure out where you should add this and complete the challenge. Okay, so that wasn't so hard. All we have to do is just to indent so we're in the right position, we're inside the body tag, and we're going to create a new paragraph element. So this is going to be on a new line from this and brew my own beers. Let's save and check it out here. All right, looks pretty good. And we're getting pretty far already. So obviously you can put as much or as little as you want here and design your website however you want it to look. Now, the next thing I want to add is this horizontal line. And we've done that previously. So you can go ahead and add that into your code file as a challenge. All right, so do you remember how to do that? Well, all we need to do is we're still staying inside the body because we're creating the content for our website. And all we need to do is just to create a horizontal rule. So I'm going to use my good friend AutoSuggest and I'm going to write HR and hit enter to insert a new horizontal rule. And now it's looking pretty similar to what we've got here. Now, the last thing I want to add is a subtitle where I'm going to list all the books and courses that I'm teaching. So go ahead and add a level 3 heading to your website underneath the horizontal rule and call it books and teaching. Or if you don't have any books and teaching, you can simply call it education and list all the schools that you've attended. So underneath the horizontal rule, I'm going to add an H3, so a level 3 heading, and this is going to be the books and teaching. All right, so we've already got most of our personal site coded up. In the next lesson, we're going to be diving into HTML lists and how we can create these bullet points as well as numbered points and add it to our website. So all of that and more, I will see you on the next lesson. So now that we understand how the HTML boilerplate works and heading to your website underneath the horizontal rule and call it books and teaching, or if you don't have any books and teaching, you can simply call it education and list all the schools that you've attended. So underneath the horizontal rule, I'm going to add an H3, so a level 3 heading, and this is going to be the books and teaching. All right, so we've already got most of our personal site coded up. In the next lesson, we're going to be diving into HTML lists and how we can create these bullet points as well as numbered points and add it to our website. So of that and more, I will see you on the next lesson. All right, so in the last lesson, we created the start of our beautiful personal website and we're modeling off John Kleinberg's homepage. So the next step that we want to achieve is this. How do we put in a bullet list into our website so that we can list maybe the books and courses that we're teaching, in my case, or it could be your education background, which schools you attend, attended, what degrees you attained, what courses you've completed, etc. So that's the next challenge. If you want, you can pause the video here and try to work it out yourself using MDN and Google search. Alternatively, you can follow along with me and we're going to go through the same process. So we're looking for a bullet list, maybe. um, and it's going to be in HTML. That's all right. So in the last lesson, we created Created the start of our beautiful personal website, and we're modeling off John Kleinberg's homepage. So the next step that we want to achieve is this. How do we put in a bullet list into our website so that we can list maybe the books and courses that we're teaching, in my case, or it could be your education background, which schools you attended, what degrees you attained, what courses you've completed, etc. So that's the next challenge. If you want, you can pause the video here and try to work it out yourself using MDN and Google search. Alternatively, you can follow along with me and we're going to go through the same process. So we're looking for a bullet list, maybe. And it's going to be in HTML. That's the language we want to write it in. And I'm going to use MDN as my documentation source. So if you hit enter, you can see that the first one that comes up is the UL element, and that's exactly what we want. So UL stands for unordered list. So essentially a bullet point list. Now, ordered list would be something that has, A, B, C, or 1,